Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about how scamsters tricked aspiring cricketers into giving them large amounts of money. We will also talk about the case of an Indian fisherman allegedly being killed by Pakistan's Maritime Security Agency. But first, we talk about COVID-19. Recently, 2 oral pills have been in the news for being effective against fighting the COVID-19 infection. One of them is Molnupiravir, which got approval from the UK drug regulator last week. And the second one is Paxlovid, which has been developed by the pharma giant Pfizer. In this segment, Conan Sheriff, who reports on health for the Indian Express, joins us on a call to talk about how effective these 2 pills are. Conan, before we talk about these 2 drugs, Molnupiravir and Paxlovid, have there been any oral drugs besides these that have been effective against COVID?
So there are 2 aspects. First is right now we don't have a drug only for treating COVID-19, but during the pandemic, we used what we call as repurposed drugs to treat people who are hospitalized. So the meaning of repurposed drug is that there is a drug which is supposed to be safe for treating an other infection or another viral infection, however, was repurposed for COVID-19 with the view that it could help severe patients on basically 2 aspects. First is reducing the severity of the disease or the infection, which we call as reducing the viral load, or to stop the cytokine storm, which is an autoimmune response of the body in the severe infections. So by addressing these 2 issues, you stopped or you reduce the mortality or the death numbers, or you reduce the hospitalization days. So this was the initial phase of the pandemic. We had basically 3 or 4 repurposed drugs. One of the most popular repurposed drugs was, of course, hydroxychloroquine, which is a repurposed drug used for malaria. And then you had remdesivir, which is an injection, not an oral drug, which was previously tested for Ebola. And then you also had interferon beta, which is used for treating multiple sclerosis. So when different countries were using these repurposed drugs, WHO in fact had started one of the largest trials across the world, which we call as solidarity trials, basically to sort of understand or determine whether these 4 repurposed drugs could moderately affect the hospitalization mortality or reduce the hospitalization rate. And then WHO concluded last year that all of these 4 repurposed drugs have very little or no effect on hospitalized COVID-19 patients. So yes, we use repurposed drugs. In fact, now also there are many repurposed drugs that we use at different stages of COVID-19 treatment. But here when we're talking about patients who are hospitalized, not patients who are mild or who have moderate symptoms. These are patients who are hospitalized and are undergoing specialized treatment. So doctors use different antiviral repurposed drugs to treat because it is the discretion of the doctors.
Okay, so now let's talk about these 2 oral drugs that are being talked about a lot, starting with Molnupiravir. The UK drug regulator gave it approval last week. It has been developed by Merck and Ridgeback. What do we know about how effective it is against COVID?
Yeah, so again, Molnupiravir is a repurposed drug. It was not specifically designed for treating COVID-19, but it was in fact used to treat influenza in its early days. This drug was undergoing clinical trials. Merck was conducting clinical trials across many centers in the US as well as outside the US. And the basic thing is that this drug reduces the virus replication. So we know that when we say a patient has high viral load, that means that the virus is multiplying at a very high pace in the lungs. So what it does is that it prevents from multiplying. So basically it keeps viral load at a very low level. So the result of this is, of course, that it reduces the severity of the disease. And we know that people who have mild symptoms or moderate symptoms don't require any specialized treatment. So effectively what it does is that it reduces both hospitalization rates as well as reduce the death numbers. So that's what this drug does. What we also know is that they had a detailed phase 3 trial, and The phase 3 trial was very positive. It is one of the first repurposed drug with a phase 3 trial. So the interim analysis that they did in October this year showed that only 7 to 8% of patients who received this drug through that 29-day period were hospitalized. And in the placebo, which is the comparator, 14% actually had to get hospitalized. And the most positive thing is that in the interim analysis, they looked at around 750 to 770 patients, and it shows that there were 0 deaths. And in the other group, there were 8 deaths. So basically what it means is that not only does it reduce hospitalization, people who had this dosage through the day 29 period, also there are no deaths reported in this interim analysis.
Yeah, and you write that the interim analysis showed that it's basically effective against the most infectious variants like the Delta variant.
Yeah, so based on this, the UK regulator looked at the data and said that this drug can be used for patients who are symptomatic with COVID-19. So that's why they have approved. So this is the first oral antiviral for COVID-19 approved by a national regulator. But also I need to tell that the US FDA has still not approved this. It is still looking at the data. US FDA is still looking at the data closely, and the FDA has to still approve this drug in United States.
Okay, so the interim analysis of the phase 3 trial of molnupiravir shows that it does reduce hospitalization and it reduces deaths. And now we come to the second drug, which is Paxlovid, which has been developed by Pfizer. How effective is this drug and how does it compare to molnupiravir?
So like molnupiravir, almost it does the same thing. What it does is again inhibit the virus replication. Here it does at a stage what we call it as the proteolysis. This is a stage where exactly the virus replication occurs. So it stops the virus replication. Again, this is also an interim data. Like Pfizer has said that the interim data is again reduces its hospitalization. Same lines as molnupiravir, where it says that there were no deaths. But again, before we understand this, this is phase 2-3 data. Here, the data has not been looked at the UK regulator or a US regulator here. So it is the version of the company. What we find is that even like the molnupiravir, this is also a 28-day sort of a period. So even in this, there were no deaths in the Paxlovid group. But in the other group, the placebo group, there were 10 deaths. And here only 0.8%, or we can say 1% of patients were hospitalized. But in the placebo group, there were 7% of patients who were hospitalized. Another promising thing about this trial is the fact that you've had trials conducted in Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, and of course in the United States. So the interim data which has come out last week actually sort of reflects the data from all of these continents. But these are early days. Pfizer has not yet submitted the data to the US regulator. So we really don't know how effective this drug is at this point of time. But the company through a press release says that it reduces the risk of hospitalization as well as death by 89%. So that's the number that they have given out.
And Conan, what do experts say about how these drugs will be used going forward? Like, will they be used alongside COVID-19 vaccinations? Because many countries are also experiencing a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Are such drugs supposed to help with that?
So the long-term way to fight COVID is therapeutics. More than vaccines, it has to be therapeutics, which is the drug. In fact, AIMS director has kept on saying that now as we enter the next phase, our focus has to be to develop a treatment for COVID-19 because at the end of the day, this is an infectious disease. So someone who gets symptoms, so you can give a tablet and that person should not go to a hospital. So that should be the aim of the drugs. Right now, we also know that vaccines, there is very little data as to how long the immunity lasts. So we are seeing that many countries are administering booster doses for the comorbid population or the elderly population. So there is a big question mark on the immunity that is generated by the vaccines is not permanent. So you need to keep giving booster doses. So that is still a question that vaccine manufacturers have not been able to answer because we still not completed more than 3 years or 4-5 years of the vaccine administration. The fastest vaccine before COVID-19, which got an approval, was mumps, which was based on 4-year trial data. But these are all data from less than a few months. So vaccines have a very important role right now at this stage of pandemic. They continue to remain very important because we know that they stop mortality. The people who are vaccinated have protection against mortality and severe disease. But looking forward, the focus has to or will shift towards therapeutics. That will be the way to fight this viral infection.
And next we talk about a cricket-related scam. A sports management company has been found to be allegedly tricking aspiring cricketers into giving them large sums of money for a chance to play in the local state cricket teams. Along with this sports management company, there were also officials of 3 state cricket associations, one-time IPL cricketer, and a Bengal under-19 player who were also involved in the scam. In this segment, Nihal Koshi, who writes on sports for the paper, joins us to talk about it. So Nihal, to begin with, could you talk about how exactly this scam worked?
So what has happened is there's this Secure Corporate Management. It's supposed to be a player management company floated by a brother and sister duo. And the thing is now cricketers, young cricketers especially, either you make it big, like you do extremely well, you play in the IPL, you get picked for the Indian team, or you play very well. There are so many domestic scouts looking out. They see you in a domestic competition, they pick you on your talent. That is one set. There's another set which really don't make it. They may be talented, they may be playing at a lower level, but they are desperate to play in a domestic team, because once you start playing in a domestic team, there are chances of IPL scouts seeing you. Once you have that stamp that, yeah, I am a domestic player, I played for a state, it makes a big difference. You could apply for a job, you could get picked in an IPL team if you have some skill which is really stands out. And there's this desperation for cricketers to play because they have seen how much money is there in the game, you know. And of course, some of them may be very passionate.
And is it this sort of desperation that generally attracts these scamsters?
Yeah, like in all fields, scamsters strive because there's desperation or people want to take a shortcut. And these scamsters were typical, like they said that they know so many people and they promised that they would get them in teams. And something what has changed is a few years ago, the BCCI added these smaller states into domestic cricket, means they were started playing Ranji Trophy, the smaller teams. So then there was a need for a lot of quality cricketers there, like especially teams from the Northeast, where they had their teams, they had their players, but when you're playing in the Ranji Trophy, you need people who have played in the bigger teams. So a lot of cricketers went there, and then each state has their own T20 league like the IPL. Since there are so many opportunities for cricketers to play, they want to quickly get there, and this is how these scamsters thrive. So theirs was a simple operation where they lured cricketers saying that we can get you to play. It's not about talent alone. You have to pay money. You may be talented, but unless you grease palms, you won't get anywhere. Once you get somewhere, then the doors open for you.
And these people were from the sports management company you talked about.
Yeah, they portrayed themselves like they know so many people, and they were in touch with many officials, like we mentioned. There were WhatsApp chats, there was money transfer. The police are investigating that. But just the fact that this company, which was based in Gurgaon, managed to be in touch with so many cricket officials who are in positions where they can decide things. So that is how they operated. So it's just that kids who complained didn't get to play. That's why they complained. Who knows how many have allegedly paid money and got to play. They won't complain. So this is a very lucrative scam, I would say, because you have cricketers who are desperate and they operate like scamsters. You know, they have probably a very nice office. And in this particular case, they had a former T20 player plus somebody who was picked for one of the IPL teams who was sort of their face. But that kid says that, no, I was also there for. They also promised me a spot in their office. But the other cricketers say he was like their face, like saying that this guy is on our rolls. And then they did the typical thing. They said that they forged a letter and said, you have been picked in Himachal. The kid went there. He spent 5 days there. Somebody came wearing a Himachal jersey, like an official, and said you have been picked. Then after 5 days, they said, no, the local players are not ready, that somebody from outside is coming. Then they took him to Sikkim. The same thing happened. And the thing is, you don't know here how many of players have paid money and managed to play, you know.
And how much money would these people typically end up giving to these scamsters?
The guy we mentioned in the story, Anshul Raj, who's from UP, who used to play in Delhi also, he paid 10 lakhs and he is not very well off, I would say. As he told me, his father had to sell land. He himself, when he heard the amount, he was disappointed because he knew that I couldn't afford it. and then he didn't want to trouble his father. But the accused in the case, Ashutosh Bora, he got to speak to the father and somehow convinced him that I will get you this is the allegation, I will get your son into one of the teams. And then the father sees the kid is so passionate and the kid also wants to take a shortcut, and they know that if they make it, it's just the hope that you play somewhere and something big happens and you manage to get into even the larger squad of the IPL. It's a big thing.
And do we know how many people might have fallen for this scam?
There are 3 who have officially complained. There are contracts with 18 others. And I'm quite sure that there are at least many such companies who are operating like this. This guy must have got caught because 3 kids who couldn't play, they decided to complain. There may be others who have paid money and are still clinging on to hope. And this guy, as soon as he realized that these kids will complain, he got a legal notice sent against them. Saying that you have signed a contract with us in which you have said that you will not play any other match. You played some match, so pay 5 lakhs. So the way they go about is the intimidation, cheating, forgery. And when you meet them, you may think that, yeah, these guys know, and they'll throw names. And of course, on their website, you have photos with some former cricketers. So it's a combination of both. It's about scamsters who operate smoothly and the desperation of kids.
And Nihal, you write that in the past there have been sting operations and some complaints here and there that have exposed the corruption in state level cricket. But in what sense do you think this case stands out?
It's just that the kind of people they were in touch with. They were in touch with people who conducted the Bihar Cricket League, which is a T20 tournament. The BCCI has clearly said that any state association which conducts a tournament needs to get permission from us. When the Bihar Cricket League was conducted, the BCCI wanted to withdraw permission at one point. But since the tournament has started, they said let it go. And the Bihar Cricket Association has a lot of factions. So people who run Bihar Cricket Association were, according to the cops, were in touch with these people. They had come to meet them for whatever reason. So it's just that how much access do these people have? I mean, if this company which is not a huge player management company, that's why probably they were under the radar. Totally, I think they would have taken over 1 crore at least in this case. And there were other FIRs also filed against the accused in Bombay, in Jodhpur. So just the fact that they are able to be in touch with people who run the game is worrisome. And the cops really need to probe and figure out, is this the tip of the iceberg, or were they just fooling these kids? And who have they been able to get into teams? For example, even in Delhi cricket, there is this talk that people get into teams because sometimes somebody has got a SUV, an expensive SUV. So it's not that it doesn't happen even in the bigger states. It happens.
And how many people have the police arrested in the case so far?
At the moment, there are 7, including associates. There's a former under-19 Bengal cricketer. There are other academy coaches. Basically, some of the coaches, their job is they know that who are the kids who are a little frustrated, who are not able to break through, who can afford some money, and they put them on to these scamsters, saying that you meet this guy and he'll help you. And the kids are so desperate, they'll say, okay, they'll go meet, and then that's how they fall. So 7 people have been arrested.
And Nihal, you have been talking to officials and people who were involved in this. What has stuck out for you in your conversations with them?
It's just that the fact that people who have been named in the story and who have been called for questioning, either one of them saying that I didn't take the money in my account, but it was in my firm's account, in my company's account. But the question is, why would you take it when you are an office bearer of an association and when somebody's come to lease a ground, any payment should go into the association's account. So that's a red flag. Even if that is what happened, he probably took the money, if he had taken the money, if that is the case, for leasing a ground, it should go into the association account. There are others who say that they've not heard of this guy. There's somebody who's returned the money as soon as this guy was arrested. So now since he's arrested and behind bars and people know that he's a scamster and they don't want to associate with them, everybody's trying to move away from him. But the cricketers themselves tell me that they knew that these were the people they were talking to. They were throwing names. They were saying, we'll get into this team, that team. We know this selector got that boy to play. So there was a racket happening. Now, to what extent the racket happened is up to the cops, how far the cops want to take this case. If they truly investigate, I'm sure the bigger fish will come out.
And in the end, we talk about the death of a fisherman. Last week, a fisherman from the Palghar district of Maharashtra was killed in the high seas off the Gujarat coast after personnel of Pakistan's Maritime Security Agency allegedly opened fire at an Indian fishing boat in the Arabian Sea. During this incident, a second fisherman was also wounded. Indian Express's Gopal Kateshia joins us on a call from Rajkot to talk about this incident. Gopal, India has said that they will now take up this issue diplomatically with the Pakistan side, but what do we know about how this incident happened?
So, what the fisherman leader of Gujarat and the Gujarat police are saying is that on Saturday, Pakistan Marine Security Agencies tried to apprehend a group of Indian fishing trawlers with Indian fishermen on board. So, they managed to apprehend one fishing trawler and apprehended 6 fishermen on board it. They also tried to apprehend another fishing trawler called Jalpari, which is registered in Verawal and which had 6 fishermen on board. But the captain of Jalpari tried to escape from that spot. This incident happened while they were fishing off Jakko coast in Porbandar. Fisherman leader and the Indian authorities are claiming that this incident happened on the Indian side of the international maritime boundary line between India and Pakistan, the marine boundary line. So while this Jalpari was trying to escape towards the Indian coast, according to the fisherman leader and Gujarat police, the PMSA opened fire on Jalpari, and one of the bullets fired by the PMSA allegedly hit one injured fisherman who is Sridhar Chimare from Palghar in Maharashtra, and he died on the spot. Another bullet hit Dilip Natu Solanki, the Tandel or captain of the fishing trawler Jalpari, but he escaped with minor injuries. And after this incident happened at around 4 o'clock in the evening on Saturday, this fishing trawler eventually managed to drop anchor into Okha Harbor on Sunday morning. And this fisherman was taken to a hospital where he was declared formally dead. So this is what we know so far.
Also, fishermen in search of better fish stock often end up crossing international waters. But how common are such incidents of firing?
Well, so fishing industry is quite important. And as per the government offices, there are around 20,000 active fishing boats. And Arabian Sea is very rich fishing waters. But fishermen and fisherman leader of Gujarat, towards the mouth of Sindhu River, the schools of fish demand very high. So there are richer fishing waters. And it is alleged that Indian fishermen get drawn towards that side. And, well, you know that India and Pakistan have dispute over the alignment of international maritime boundary line. So Indian side always claims that Indian fishermen cross that IMBL inadvertently in search of better fishing waters. And that's how they get trapped and then sometimes apprehended by PMSA. But incidents of firing on fishing trawlers, on fishermen, are not routine. They do happen. Last year, there were 2 incidents, one in April and one in September. In 2015, one Indian fisherman was killed allegedly in PMSA firing, but these incidents are not commonplace. Well, apprehension by PMSA of Indian fishermen, they have more or less been a routine occurrence for at least 2-3 decades now. But Indian fishermen dying in firing by PMSA at sea, these are not very common incidents.
And talking about fishermen being apprehended by the Pakistani officials, could you talk about how many such cases we have seen in the past and what has it meant for the fishing community there?
So fishing in Arabian Sea off Kutch coast has been a very tricky issue between India and Pakistan, an issue which has remained unresolved despite after 75 years of partition. So every year, hundreds of Indian fishermen are arrested by Pakistan, and in turn, India arrests around a few dozen Pakistani fishermen. So as per the latest figure, around 600 Indian fishermen are lodged in Pakistan jails, and around 60 odd Pakistani fishermen are lodged in Indian jails. And there are 1,200 plus boats, Indian boats of Indian fishermen in custody of Pakistan, and each boat costs around rupees 50 lakh, and they provide livelihood to around 6 to 10 families each. So besides the human cost, there is economic cost also involved in this issue.
And these cases of arrests and fishermen getting into trouble also happens along the India and Sri Lanka maritime borders. How does the situation on that side compare to what happens in the Arabian Sea with Pakistan?
So in January this year, 4 Tamil Nadu fishermen were killed allegedly after their fishing boats hit with a ship of the Sri Lankan Navy. Eventually, their bodies were handed back to India. So Indian fishermen have issues while fishing in the Malaccan Straits along the coast of in the sea between the India and Sri Lanka, and at the Arabian Sea between Pakistan and India. But the scale of problem is much higher when it comes to India and Pakistan as compared to India and Sri Lanka. Around 50 to 60 Indian fishermen get caught by Sri Lankan Navy annually. But here, Pakistan sometimes apprehends around 200 fishermen, sometimes it's 300 fishermen annually. And the number of boats that Pakistan sees is also huge. And this issue has persisted. And peace activists and NGO people who are involved with NGOs which are seeking to promote friendly ties between the two nations, they have been demanding that both the countries must adopt a no arrest policy when it comes to fishermen inadvertently crossing over to the other side of the IMBL. But this has not happened yet.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargav, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.